Good evening, David.
Good evening.
I'm sure you're busy. Melvin did have a request that we show the original race equity motion tonight. I have that. I can put it in chat, or I can.
Okay.
I don't know if chat is open.
Chat is open at the moment. Let's see. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead and put it there. I think I appreciate Melvin's recommendation that we let people know the original motion, and then there will be some, of course, friendly amendments that have modified it.
Okay.
Okay, that's the original. And
well,
I'll put the.
I'm not sure that you can do it with friendly amendments. I think you have to do it with a regular amendment because it's substantively different.
My understanding is you can do that with friendly amendments as long as nobody objects.
Oh, that'd be fine. Without
yeah, that's what I read in the rules of order.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. And thanks for the suggestion. I think it's a good one.
How are you, Dave?
Oh, I'm good. How about yourself?
Hanging in there. Did you have the snow this morning?
I saw it. Yeah, it lasted for, about a half hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting.
It was. It was big and huge flakes. And it was about 35 degrees when they were coming down, so didn't have much of a chance.
My daughter lives in Gig Harbor, and they got quite on the lawn.
Oh.
It actually stuck over there.
Wow. Must have been a little cooler over there.
Yeah, it must be.
Let's see now. Oh, okay. I got it.
Recording in progress.
ICC meeting. And we have a quorum, and I want to thank you all for spending your time with us. The Community Council operates best when we have wide participation. At this point, I'll ask Nick Simmons to give us a brief technical overview for how we're conducting this meeting by Zoom.
Hello, all. I'm going to keep it very simple. Please join with one device per room. And because we have somewhat crummy internet connections on Vashon, usually that means one device per house, or it'll be hard for us to hear you. We're going to be at some point probably asking for show of hands if there's sort of an impromptu poll. That can be found under reactions. If you click that little reaction button, there's a button that says raise hand. That will keep your hand raised until you click that lower hand button again. And I think that's it. This meeting is being recorded. The chat is also on, only will go to me, and then I will forward it to the folks who need it. And Diane, you have something additional?
Yes, I would like to mention that people who are dialing in and aren't accessing this meeting on a computer will be unable to raise their hands when it's time, if they want to speak. And so for only those people who are calling in on a phone, if you wish to speak to a motion and get in the line of people who are going to be speaking, please unmute yourself and just let us know that you would like to be on the list of people to speak.
Okay. Now, before we, excuse me, is there some feedback here? Well, before we proceed with the meeting, I just wanted to mention that I've been contacted by almost 20 people about the way the last meeting went, and that it was dominated by certain people. And I have to apologize because I felt that it was important to allow everyone to speak, but on the other hand, it's also important to allow everyone equal access to speaking. And if one person or two people dominate a meeting, that doesn't happen. So I will be asking everyone to share their ideas in 2 minutes or less on a topic. And if you've spoken already on a topic, you would need to wait until everyone else speaks about that topic before, you should even ask for an additional 2 minutes to address it. I do not want to have to mute anyone, but if someone is disturbing the meeting and the progress of the meeting, I would like to ask that person politely to stop doing that. And if that doesn't work, I will ask the general meeting, the participants at the meeting, if they believe that this person is essentially out of order and that they would like this person to be muted. If that becomes necessary, hopefully it will not. At this point, I would like to review the agenda for tonight's meeting. It's been sent out and it's a very crowded agenda, so we're going to try to make things go quickly. So has anyone here any changes to the agenda that they feel necessary or additions? And excuse me, one thing we did not say is the way that you can raise your hand is there's a reactions button at the bottom and it's toward the right. And when you click on reactions, one of the reactions is raise hand. And I'll demonstrate that right now. And then if you want to lower your hand, you click on lower hand. So when people want to say something, please raise your hand by hitting that reaction. Now, I'm going to go through and see if I see any people who have any, Melvin, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
In terms of the agenda.
Yes.
The motion that has been put forward by the board has never been offered in a previous meeting. And so therefore, to me, I think it's new business. We do not have a new business section in the agenda. And so I'm suggesting, actually, I'm moving that we create a new business section after old business and place the board motion where it belongs in new business.
I have no problem with that. I think it's an appropriate motion. And I'd also note that the board has discussed this, the fact that it is new business and that it hasn't been before the board for a month. And so the board has decided that, we will mention it, but we will carry it over for a second month for a vote if appropriate. I think the board did want to look at this issue again.
Well, my motion, if there's a second, is to actually not bring it up until new business.
Okay,
So the old business is handled first.
yes, and so the new business would be after the old business, I take it.
Yes.
I second
Okay.
that motion.
All right. Well, if we could take a vote by show of hands, it's a little difficult to see it that way, but let's do that. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 42, 43, 44, 45. Well, we have 71 people, so with 45 votes, I would say that that motion carries.
David,
So we will put that over to new business at the end of the meeting. Okay, thank you for bringing that up.
David,
Yes,
when I go to reactions and it gives me the choice of either clap or thumbs up, so I select the clap, I'm assuming that's what you mean.
well, actually, right below that, excuse me, but if you look just below the clap and the thumbs up is a kind of a bar that says raise hand or lower hand.
I don't have that.
Okay, well then give a thumbs up if you'd like, or a clap. Either one of those would work.
The problem is those are self-clearing, so I don't know if I'm being counted or not. In other words, I'll
Oh.
select clap
Can I
and it goes
offer-
away on its own.
Can I offer a possible option?
Okay. And
On
who's the-
mine, I
okay.
click. My name is Linda, and
Okay.
on mine, I click on the participants, and that's where my hand raise and lower is. So if you
Oh,
click
okay.
on the participant, it might come up.
Okay, thank you, Linda. All right, are there any other additions or corrections to the agenda? And it's a little difficult to see everyone at once, but I thought I saw, nope. All right, I don't see any other people who believe that the agenda needs to, oh, Rich Murphy. Yes, your hand is raised.
Thanks, David. You
Sure.
said a minute ago that the agenda had been sent out. I don't,
By
I don't
email,
act-
by
I don't
email.
act- I don't actually have a copy of the agenda.
Are you on our mailing list?
I don't know that. But I
Well-
live on Vashon and I'm attending, so.
Oh, okay, well, let me see if I could share the screen for the agenda. That might be helpful. Oh, but
David,
our host would have to do that, yes?
David, he can also go to our website. The agenda's on our website.
Okay, Rich, the agenda is on the website, vmicc.net.
Is it possible for you to just put it in the chat?
I don't know if the chat can accommodate that.
Can you put a link in the chat that'll take me straight to
I
it?
will put a
Oh.
link in the chat for you.
Great,
Okay.
thanks, Nick.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
Rich, please, while you're there, contact us that you want to be on our mailing list.
Okay, will do. Thank you, David.
Okay, you're welcome. I see a hand raised by Armin Yusufian. Yes,
Can you hear me this time?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. I completely agree with Melvin that it was appropriate to move that motion to the new business because the bylaws or policies state that if you have a new motion, it's to be, so that's fine. But what, that triggers something else, a cascade of events. And I agree with the.
Armin, is this dealing with the agenda at this time?
It is,
Because
yes.
we just voted on this. Okay, what is it? I can hear you. Well, I thought I could hear you. I can't hear you, Armin.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you have on the agenda 2 motions that I believe the motion that has now been moved to new business said would be heard after we voted on the motion to see whether those would be symbolic nature motions or whatever. So I'm thinking that those 2 motions should be moved to next month after you.
I appreciate, again, you're muted, Armin.
Oh gosh, I don't know what keeps
Okay.
happening. Those 2 motions that were subject to the motion to decide whether or not you wanted to avoid symbolic motions, those would, it seems to me, should now be moved to next month also.
Okay, well, I appreciate that suggestion, Armin. One thing that has been brought to our attention is that the board already has a way of dealing with matters that are not appropriate to the island, that do not directly concern the island. The board has decided to, on its own, had decided to carry over its motion to next month, even if it hadn't been put to new business. And we can just hear both of those motions on the merits. And if the board, I believe it's by a 2/3 vote, decides that it's not appropriate to the community council, we can say so, and it shouldn't be considered. Is that correct, Diane? You'd been looking at this issue.
That's my understanding, yes. Now that the board can do that, and in a general meeting then, that the general meeting takes precedence over what the board chooses. So that would have to be, that could be changed by the general meeting, but the board can definitely do that.
Okay. I see Roxanne's hand is up.
Thank you. I'll try to make this very quick. If, according to Robert's Rules of Order and
Roxanne, before you go on, we're not going according to Robert's rules.
You're doing democratic rules of order.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
on specific issues, your democratic rules of order refer you forward to Robert's Rules of Order. So this may be within a foot in both of those.
Okay.
If you're just introducing these motions at this meeting, that kind of is not in line with democratic or Robert's Rules of Orders. And you would have to introduce them, let people look at them, get input for the next month, and then vote on them the following month.
Right, and that has been what was done. They were introduced at the previous meeting, albeit the motion that's on the floor with regard to equity and racial justice has been modified by the maker of the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you for bringing that up. Anyone other than Armin? Armin, I believe you had a chance to speak on this already.
On what?
On this issue.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, if you can be very brief, Armin, I'll let you talk further, but we don't want you to spend all of our time, about your concerns at this point. People all have concerns, and this is a meeting with 76 people in attendance, so please be brief.
I'm sorry, I wasn't planning to speak about anything. I don't know what I'm supposed to be speaking about.
Oh, your hand was up. That's why I called on you. All right. Okay, sorry, Armin.
Sorry.
I apologize. All right, next then on the agenda, let's see, approve minutes of last month's meeting. Those minutes have been sent out. Have people had an opportunity to review those? Okay. Are there changes or corrections to those to the minutes? And I may need some help on seeing all the hands raised because of the number of participants in this meeting. And I apologize if I've missed anyone, but I'm trying to catch everyone. So, okay. Well, then we will adopt the minutes from last month's meeting. And now I'd like to introduce the guests who are here, particularly the guests from off island. Now with the Zoom meeting, it's a little bit easier. You don't have to run to catch a ferry, but let's see.
Evan has his hand up.
Oh, Evan?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Evan. What is?
Sorry, I just meant to vote to approve the minutes.
Oh, okay. You don't have to. It's someone who challenges the minutes. That's the issue. Okay. Thank you, Evan. Well then, next on the agenda, we'd like to introduce guests. I saw that Bong Santo Domingo is here. I believe Nicole Sanders is present. I believe that we have Major Joe Hodgson, although let me make sure that he's here.
I don't believe he's here, David.
Okay, yeah, I don't see him either. Is Todd Myers here? Yes, there he is. Well, thank you all for joining our meeting. So at this point, the next item on the agenda, which dealt with the decision of the board, is being set over to new business. And it's my understanding that at that point, the board may even be withdrawing the motion for the moment, or we'll set it over. Okay, I see AM, heads up, you can see who has their hand raised or other reaction by going into the participant window. Ah, great. Well, thank you. I'm a neophyte at this, and so I appreciate, Amy Morrison, of course. Amy's an expert at the Zoom process, so I really appreciate your help. All right. Okay, the next on the agenda was an update from the King County Sheriff's Office. Unfortunately, I don't think Joe Hodgson is here, so we can move on to the next item. And if he does attend and come in, we can get back to his issue. All right. Now, the next item on the agenda is Nancy O'Connor, Zero Waste Vashon, a brief update. Nancy, would you like to fill us in?
Hi, sorry,
Hi there.
I'm unmuted. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
So I'm Nancy O'Connor, and I'm the president of Zero Waste Vashon, and I look forward to doing a longer presentation to tell you everything that we're up to in the future. But tonight's agenda got pretty packed, and I asked Diane if I could just mention one thing. And so Zero Waste Vashon is all about helping Vashon become a waste to resource community, which means instead of throwing things away, sending things to the landfill, we look for ways that they can be put to beneficial use. About 40% of what we dispose of on the island is organic material. And to that end, we have been working diligently with the county for 4+ years, investigating whether it would make sense for Vashon to have its own community scale compost facility. Right now, the yard waste that you take to the transfer station gets shipped about 30 some miles to Cedar Grove, where it's processed and then shipped back. And so there's a real big greenhouse gas footprint to that, in addition to cost. So the county did a feasibility study, looked at the possibility of us having our own community scale compost facility, and they have published that, and you can access that probably most easily through our website, which is www.zerowastevashon.org. And I know Steve Bergman is on the meeting. So Steve, would you please put that in the chat for everyone? So you can go there, and then you can find the link to the community, or to the King County study. But they have said that the study said that it makes sense to do this on Vashon. So now they're looking to see how Vashon feels about that. And so they are sending out a survey. We are working with them. Our organization is on putting together the survey, and there's a consultant involved as well. And the survey will go out in the beginning of January, and it's asking residents about several aspects about compost and a compost facility here on the island, and also the possibility of us getting third bin collection. So that's the yard waste bin, that you could add that to your garbage service. If you currently subscribe to the garbage service here on the island, you could have yard and food waste picked up curbside. And that's a service that 99% of King County has, and we don't. So please look for the survey. It will come in an oversized postcard in your mail. They're telling me it should go out right around the first week in January. And that will have a QR code on it that links you to an online survey. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to encourage everybody to hopefully give your support towards this, but give your opinions regardless. It's important that the county hears from us. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, next on the
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Nancy, is there a proposed location for that on the island?
No, they have not gone to that yet. They're taking real baby steps towards this, and so they have not gone to that yet. Zero Waste Vashon is advocating for a location at the transfer station property. That seems to make the most sense. But the county has not made any kind of a decision on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you, Melvin. Okay, the next item on the agenda is regarding the King County building code amendments that are proposed. And we have a speaker from King County who's indicated that she will briefly just state what this issue is about. We also have two speakers who have been invited to address this issue and basically speak opposed to the issue. One is Todd Myers, director of the Center for the Environment at the Washington Policy Center, and the other is Ward Carson. So we have assigned them 20 minutes to address this issue. I think it was a feeling that in order to be fair and have both sides presented fairly, that we would do that. But just so that some of the people who haven't been at the previous meetings and would like to know what this issue is about, Nancy Sanders from King County is going to discuss this building code in about 5 minutes. So thank you, Nancy, for joining our meeting.
You're welcome. So should I do that now, David?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, perfect. So I'm Nicole Sanders, a green building principal planner with King County, and I was asked to provide a recap of the Building and Energy Code proposal that was recently transmitted to King County Council for their consideration, and they'll begin looking at that starting in January and February of next year. So these codes will apply to all commercial buildings as well as residential buildings 4 stories tall or taller. The proposed code amendments broadly would require increased energy efficiency, like for lighting and windows, solar readiness for multifamily buildings. The state already requires that for commercial buildings, as well as requiring a small amount of on-site solar power generation. So for a 2-story building, the equivalent roof size of solar is about 4% of the roof. So the codes would also disallow on-site fossil fuel combustion for space heating and for hot water circulation systems. So those are water heating systems typically found in multifamily buildings, as well as larger commercial buildings. These codes would reduce natural gas and propane consumption in new buildings, as well as for large retrofit projects, which is another time that these codes would become applicable. So these amendments were proposed primarily to reduce on-site releases of climate changing emissions. Natural gas makes up roughly 1/3 of the emissions of the built environment, that emissions generated from the built environment. The codes will also have no impact on affordable housing projects under 4 stories, because the codes don't apply then. When an affordable housing project is proposed that's 4 stories tall or taller, we're estimating a 0.5% cost impact. So about $1,000 of added cost per unit, where a typical per unit development cost is between $250,000 to $350,000. So the first buildings built under these codes, if approved, would start going up in 2023 or 2024. That timing would capitalize on Washington State's increasingly green energy sources, as state law requires Washington energy grids to be coal-free by 2025, as well as a carbon neutral electricity by 2030. So that's the recap of the code package. I can always, if people want to ask questions, I can always put my email in the chat, but I'll also be staying around in case the chair has any factual questions that come up that I need to respond to for the ordinance.
Okay,
so
thank you very much, Nancy. Yeah. And the 2 speakers who are here, Todd Myers and Ward Carson, Armin Yusufian has volunteered to introduce them. So Armin, I'll open the floor to you. Armin, I believe you may be muted.
Okay, can you hear me this time?
Can hear you now. Okay.
Okay. I was wondering if we could ask that Nancy person any questions.
Not at this time. We've got a tight agenda. Maybe at the end, after the speakers have presented, then maybe if people want, but we're trying to move this quickly, and we've 20 minutes devoted to the speakers that you've invited.
Okay, our first speaker will be Ward Carson. Ward Carson has a PhD in mechanical engineering and is an island resident. And it should be noted he is one of the founding members of the Vashon Climate Action Group. And at this point, and he has a presentation that hopefully is going to be displayed on the screen as well. So take it away, Ward.
Thank you, Armin.
Ward, you're muted. You're still muted, I think.
Is Ward even in the meeting at this point? Oh, there he is. Yeah, he's not muted. Ward?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, you've got the floor.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you fine now. Thank you. And did you want Nick to share your presentation at this point?
Pardon?
You had a presentation, I believe.
It was rolling. I recorded it.
Oh, okay.
Did you couldn't hear it?
No.
I wonder why. Okay, let's go.
It could be that you're unable to share that. And sometimes when you click share screen, you also have to say share sound. So, but you're not the host, so Nick would have to do that, I believe.
Okay, and Nick, I've also requested that Nick put on the diagram so that everyone can view it.
Okay.
So I can share that photograph. Ward, you also have the ability, participants have the ability to share their screens.
Oh, okay.
If you want to share your screen, you're welcome to.
Okay, I'm assuming that you could hear that that recording.
No, we can't. Sorry.
It's a little trickier to pipe your computer's audio out into your own microphone so that it comes out through the Zoom call. Recordings are tricky. Do you have a document you could read for us?
Okay, I'll go back to the actual text.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
As a suggestion for participants in this meeting, in the future, if we have things like sharing an audio presentation, we're going to need to rehearse that before the meeting. And it's a little tricky at first. We're not as familiar with this, but continue, Ward, sorry.
Okay, I'm ready. You can view I won't get to the chart for a few minutes, but I have everything prepared here. First,
Okay.
I would like to mention that, as you know, I was scheduled to speak to the Community Council in November, and that did not go well. I have since, after an email exchange with Kevin Jones and others, understood why. I thought I was addressing the general subject of what can be done on Vashon to mitigate our greenhouse gases. However, the Community Council thought I would be speaking out against the King County proposal to alter the building codes on Vashon in the future. Although the subjects are related, I believe it would be helpful if I, before we begin tonight, emphasize the narrow limits of my objective. Please recognize that I was a founding member of the Vashon Climate Action Group, and generally I am against all fracking and leakage of natural gas or burning of any fossil fuels, whether it be on Vashon or in buildings or vehicles, or in particular, if the fossil fuels are used to generate electricity in power plants anywhere in the world. More specifically, I had published an article in the December 9th issue of the Beachcomber that expressed my general attitude towards PSE or any power plant burning any fossil fuels to generate electricity anywhere in the world. And it is here where our objectives merge. But I should be careful to identify just how I believe they do merge. To be brief, it seems safe to claim that all of us, including myself, want to eliminate as much burning of natural gas as possible, locally or around the world. I admit the King County proposal will, in the future, directly accomplish one part of that goal. But there is today, and has been for decades, a much larger amount of natural gas burned daily, namely that burned by the power plants to generate or supply our local electricity needs. My goal is to address the burning of natural gas at that level. So with the 7 minutes, I hope, I have left, I'd like to accomplish the following: quantify the burning problem as I see it by describing it with data collected by the Department of Energy for the year 2020, which the chart represents. Demonstrate how the inefficient burning of fossil fuels squanders 2/3 of its energy potential, and show why in 2020 it would have been silly to expect to reduce greenhouse gas use by replacing the local energy needs with electricity generated as it is done today. And then finally, I want to introduce you to this Department of Energy flowchart that certainly illustrates our burning problems as they result from the use of electricity and create and provide by power plant systems as used today. So we shall rely on the graphic display called a Sansky chart of the Department of Energy data. It will expose the gross inefficiencies that have compromised our system for more than a century. The title, which you're looking at, I hope, of the chart announces that we consumed in 2020 92.9 quadrillion BTUs of energy total. Now, a BTU is a unit of energy, same as kilowatt hour. 1 kilowatt hour equals 3,412 BTUs. This chart shows how energy flows from left to right through our economy. Look to the left side of the chart. It illustrates the energy sources: solar, nuclear, hydro, wind, geothermal, natural gas, coal, biomass, and petroleum. The amount contributed by each source is listed in the respective box, and the sum equals 92.9 quadrillion BTUs as expected. Oh boy, let's see here. Got a problem. Okay, look at the left side of the chart. I got that, okay. Look at the right side of the chart. It shows energy flowing through the residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation sectors of our economy. Some as electricity, shown by the orange lines, and some directly from the fuel sources. A portion was used in these sectors as energy services. And in that box to the extreme right, it notes 30.6 quads total resulted in energy services. The rest was classed as rejected energy, wasted generally as heat, and that amount was 62.3 quads, totaling 92.9 quads as expected. This would surprise no one in the energy business. Since the early 1900s, this ratio, 2 BTUs wasted for every serviceable BTU utilized, has been normal. When one is burning fuel in power plants or other heat engines, one expects to consume 3 BTUs for every BTU needed for the service. But our focus tonight will be the orange generation box towards the top of the chart and the orange flow lines tracking the electricity used in the system. 35.6 quadrillion BTUs were used in that electricity generation in 2020. To the left of the box, it is noted that 18% of that was supplied by renewable sources. This is nationwide, while 82% came from burning non-renewable fuels, primarily fossil fuels. To the right side of the electricity box, one can see that 12.4 quads of actual electricity is generated, while the rest, 23.2 quads, is wasted and goes over to the rejected as heat in the generation and delivery process. So again, the overall inefficiency of the power plant is revealed here. Useful energy out, 12.4 quads in electricity form, divided by the energy used, 35.6 used in generation, indicates 34.8% efficiency, meaning that approximately 3 units for 1 unit ratio, 3 kilowatt hours used for every kilowatt delivered shows up again here. Now we are prepared for some conclusions. If you purchase kilowatts of electricity from a typical supplier in 2020, there were likely to have burned nearly 3 kilowatt hours of energy to meet the demand. And the largest amount of the energy produced greenhouse gases. For example, if 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity was used to cool or heat a 3-story building, roughly the equivalent of 2,460 kilowatt hours of fuel were burned back at some power plant. Another example, suppose you had a Tesla in 2020 on Vashon and charged it every night to commute to the, somewhere next day. Say your charge required 10 kilowatts. Roughly 17.6 kilowatt hours of greenhouse gases were produced and emitted back at the power plant to fuel your commute. So my point is, if the energy systems of 2020 are not replaced with non-burning renewable energy sources, such as hydro, wind, or solar, our major problem will reside at the power plant. If the demand for electricity to replace local burning is increased, that problem, under the current condition, will likely increase the burning at the power plant, all because such gross inefficiencies have been accepted for over a century. So the ultimate solution, the right-minded activists addressing this problem must understand the big picture as published annually and shown annually by the Department of Energy and shown here in this chart. We must keep this scanty diagram in mind as we encourage the UTC commissioners or the legislators or whoever to face the major problems. And as far as PSC is involved, we can always replace them with a public utility district or our own electricity co-op if they fail to meet our expectations. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ward, and thank you for staying on time.
Okay, did I make it? Thank you.
Now, Armin, your next speaker, if you'd like to introduce him.
Yes, thank you, David.
Sure.
Our next speaker is Todd Myers. Todd Myers is a nationally recognized environmental expert. He's a published author in the field. And he's also a beekeeper, I might mention. He likes bees and he propagates bees. So Todd Myers, take it away.
Thank you. Saying that I propagate bees, I have to admit they do most of the work. But thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I'm going to try to keep it below 10 minutes so that people have questions. They can ask questions. I'm happy to answer it. I have worked on environmental policy for more than 2 decades, was actually a supporter of the 2016 carbon tax. And personally, I'm carbon neutral, and I'll talk about how I do that and why I think that the approach that I use and Microsoft uses is a better one that's being proposed. The first thing is that you have to understand what the existing statewide policy is that we have just adopted. Because one of the major concerns about, one of the major problems with this proposal to eliminate natural gas as a source of home heating is that it costs a lot, but it doesn't actually add any CO2 reductions in addition to the statewide plan that we already have. Last legislative session, Washington State adopted what's called a cap and trade system. So we have a cap on CO2 emissions that declines over time to 0 to 2050, so that the state is net zero. However, each time we go, it goes down gradually. So what you have to make sure is that what is the impact of the policies under that cap? There is already an incentive to reduce. natural gas heating, and other CO2 emitting fuels. So what this does is that it doesn't actually add to that cap. If this passes, the cap stays the same and we meet the same targets. If it doesn't pass, we meet the exact same targets. So this policy, the question about this policy is not whether it actually reduces CO2 emissions compared to what the state would otherwise do. It won't. The question is this an effective way, and is this a cost-effective way to reduce CO2 emissions? Because we only have a limited amount of money. People, homeowners, apartment dwellers only have a limited amount of money. And so therefore you have to make sure that what we're doing makes sense. And in that area, it's an extremely expensive and ineffective approach. Washington State, King County have consistently missed our CO2 targets. And the reason we consistently miss those CO2 targets is because we choose policies that sound good, but don't do very much. So for instance, Nicole mentioned that in the proposal that it would require some amount of solar on the roof of apartment buildings. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory says that Western Washington is literally the worst place in the nation for solar panels outside of Alaska. Alaska is simply too far north. So if you're looking for effective ways to reduce CO2 emissions, putting solar panels in Western Washington is, especially rooftop solar, is the most expensive way to do that. We can use money other places better. The same thing is true with natural gas. Now, it is true that natural gas, that homes emit about 2 metric tons of CO2. However, all of the natural gas is covered by the existing cap and trade, as I said, and it costs so much to install the equipment to have heating, electric heating rather than natural gas heating, that it would cost somewhere between $100 to $200 per metric ton of CO2 reduced. By way of contrast, California's carbon price is currently about $20, and Seattle City Light spends less than $10 to reduce a metric ton of CO2. Finally, there is a metric called the social cost of carbon. The social cost of carbon is basically how much does it cost when you emit a metric ton of CO2. And that includes climate impacts, impact on flooding, all those sorts of things. And Washington State has set the social cost of carbon at about $71. So in other words, if you're charging $100 per metric ton and you're only getting $71 back, you're actually doing more harm than good with that policy. It doesn't mean we shouldn't reduce CO2 emissions. Indeed, we should. I've been working to do that. It just means that we are wasting money that we could use to do more environmental benefit. So when we're trying to judge where we put our resources, where we get the most bang for our buck to help the environment, every state that has looked at it, the social cost of carbon, economists like Bill Nordhaus, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work on climate change, use that metric of what it costs per metric ton to make sure that we're doing the most good for the environment with every dollar. The last thing I will say about this proposal is you had somebody on last time who said that it actually would reduce electricity and utility costs. That is not true. Seattle City Light says that it costs about 20% more to have electric heating than natural gas heating. So it's not merely the additional cost upfront to install the equipment, it's also a monthly cost that goes with that. So the question is, if you care about climate change, the more you care about climate change, the more you want to make sure that we spend our money well, that we get the most environmental bang for the buck. And unfortunately, the policies of putting rooftop solar, but also banning natural gas are really expensive ways to do it. And given the state's cap and trade system, they don't actually increase total CO2 emissions reduced in Washington State. All they do is they say, you have to do it in this particular way. And it's a particular way that is very expensive and wasteful. There's a better alternative. And the alternative is to use an approach like Microsoft, or what I do, which is that I invest in CO2 projects that reduce CO2 emissions. So I am carbon neutral. Every year, I go to the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and they have projects of people who are reducing CO2 or methane in a variety of ways. I pay about $10 a metric ton. So almost basically for the amount that it would cost to reduce 1 metric ton using this proposal, I can become carbon neutral. That's the approach that we need to take. The reason that we're missing so many of our CO2 targets, King County set targets for 2020 emissions in 2008. By 2018, they'd only met 4% of that goal. The reason we are missing all of these is because we do things that sound cool, that sound trendy, but when you actually look at where you get the bang for the buck, they're very poor. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, and what I'd like to do at this point is to open the floor for questions for our 2 speakers and also for the person who had introduced this, Nicole Sanders, in case people have questions of Nicole as well. I see Robert Piston has a hand up, and I'd like to,
David,
yes.
Scott had his hand
okay.
up first.
Scott, if you could ask a question.
My question is, he just talked a lot about CO2. My understanding was one of the reasons, maybe the main reason for this proposal is to cut methane, and that is natural gas. If we don't, and natural gas is now from fracking. So it's a rejection of fracking. And I would like to know the carbon impact of fracking from the first time they drive out to explore a well through all of the piping and leaking and transporting and burning of methane versus electricity, even with the losses that Ward talked about. Are we understanding the true cost of methane? And that includes the 27 times more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. Could you address that?
Yeah, this is a great question. So CO2 is sort of a shorthand. When you see it written, it's typically written as what's called CO2e, and the E stands for equivalent to address the issue that you raised with methane, which is CH4. So that is between 20 and 30 times more potent to greenhouse gas. So if you reduce 1 metric ton of methane, it's like 20 to 30 tons of CO2. So it's really a great thing to reduce. There's 2 parts. You addressed the methane emissions from the wellhead, from that leak from the wellhead. There's another, the CO2 that I'm addressing is when that natural gas is actually burned to generate the heat. Then it creates CO2. Okay, so there's 2 parts. There's the part that you mentioned, which is what's called fugitive gas, which is leaking. And then there's the CO2 that leaks when you do the heating. So the methane that you are accounting for is covered by the state's cap. So cap and trade accounts for natural gas and the cost of natural gas. They will, in statute, they calculate what, how much CO2 equivalent, CO2e is related to each therm of natural gas. And that takes into that account. So it takes into account what you're talking about. So I hope that was clear, but yes, you make a good point, but that is calculated in the state's cap and trade system.
Okay, Robert Piston had his hand up next. Robert?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank all 3 speakers. I think they were all very, very clear and cogent in what they said. I have a question for Todd, and that is specifically, I don't quite understand the details of how investing money someplace results in becoming carbon neutral. Can you give me just a few details without taking a long time?
Absolutely, I'll be quick. So as Scott just mentioned, methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. So unlike typical pollution, where we think of like smog and things like that, that's in a local area, the challenge of global warming and CO2 is that CO2 emitted anywhere affects all of us. So whether it's in Seattle or China or Europe or anywhere, it all affects us. So that's a problem, but it's also an opportunity, which is that if I can stop CH2 or methane from emitting anywhere, it's the same as if we do it on Vashon Island or in Seattle. So the reason I mentioned methane is because what I invest in is that in landfills. So when what's in landfills decomposes, it generates methane. What some landfills do and what more landfills need to do is capture that methane and use it as an energy source. So rather than go into the atmosphere, they're using it as an energy source rather than using brand new fossil fuels from the ground. So what I invest in are projects that capture that CH4, that methane, and reuse it. And so even though that's not right in my backyard and your backyard, because it is prevented from going into the atmosphere, that does as much good as if I drove less. That's how we're going to defeat climate change, not by forcing everybody to change their lives, because people don't like that. We need to open up the opportunities so that people can find something that works for them. And projects like that, it's what Microsoft does. Projects like that are the way that we are going to be effective.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. Good
Okay.
question.
Do we have other questions? I'm looking through the participants and I don't see, Virginia Lohr. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Nicole. I'd like to know, Nicole, what do you think about what we heard from Todd Myers?
I think I would probably have some differing opinions on some of the subjects. I'm here more to sort of answer factual questions about the ordinance or some of those specifics. I'm not really here to kind of be in the advocacy role, but I will say that there's a lot of users right now of natural gas in our current built environment, and come 2030, the electricity is supposed to be greenhouse gas neutral. So getting buildings onto electricity systems that will be greenhouse gas neutral and off of natural gas commitments where that certainty is less, that is a very uncertain future. I think that is a strong policy move. So I can respond to specific questions, but broadly, I'm kind of limited in sort of how I speak about things, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Spike O'Neill, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. To be a point of clarity, I'm with a group called the Affordable Energy Coalition. And we specifically focus on the economic impact of policies like the one initiated by Seattle and being considered by King County. We completed a study from the Oxford Economics Group. And what that showed us was the not exact, but a fair estimation using standards, conservative standards, for the economic impact of these proposals in Seattle specifically, King County next, and other municipalities that may come online in the future. The cost of a home conversion to electric heat, the efficiency of a heat pump unit, for example, in a home, and how it loses its efficiency when temperatures get below 30 degrees. And the cost to homeowners and to renters impacted by these policies. What we found is that low-income families are going to be bearing a disproportionate burden of the higher energy costs of converting these buildings of commercial and high density to electric, eliminating the use of gas. And again, we are also not an advocate for the petroleum industry. We're about the impacts of energy costs on the citizenry, on business, and on labor. So what I'm wondering is it was Nicole, I hope if I got the name correct, I apologize if not, the speaker about King County's policies. Have the considerations, Nicole, of who's going to bear the cost of these increased energy costs, has that been considered by King County?
Yes. So there are two things that are going on with what you're talking about. You're talking about the costs of homes when they get converted to heat pumps and how that might increase a low-income household's utility costs. And then there's also potentially the impacts of how system-wide changes might affect rates. And I think you're actually speaking more to the first rather than rate changes, because rate changes are really guided by the Utilities Transportation Commission. Our proposal will not be requiring single-family homes to change their heat sources. So a low income or a homeowner or a resident in a single family home, they will not be affected by this code proposal. The code proposal only affects housing developments that are 4 stories tall or taller. So, and that was in my little brief thing around the cost impacts for affordable housing unit are projected to be $1,000 per unit, which with the development costs of between $250,000 to $350,000 per unit. So assuming a $250,000 cost development per unit for a 4-story affordable housing project, it would add 0.4% to the costs. So you're right that there are some, cost impacts when you start talking about converting single family homes, and that's its own Gordian knot to try and untangle, but this specific proposal will not be affecting that. And then I will say, yeah, go ahead.
This also affects high, like 4-story and above multi-unit facilities, which are occupied mostly by renters.
Yeah.
And as those buildings are either constructed or retrofit to meet this new guideline, then those utility costs are going to raise for the tenants of those buildings. And I don't want to get too much into King County's problems or Seattle City's problems, because we're talking about Vashon Island. What we're concerned about is as gas is eliminated as a resource, then the cost of electric is going to be raised for all residents on Vashon and everywhere else.
Right. So we probably don't want to do a back and forth, but I will say that some of the other proposals where we have increasing energy efficiency, as well as some on-site renewable generation, which you don't have a lot of the transmission losses for electricity, that does help to offset some of the increased impacts on the utility system. 2, there's a lot of changes that are going on in terms of how the utilities are going to be planning for their power in the future. So, state building codes have certain requirements for increasing efficiency. So these are all things that have to be taken into account in utility planning with what they submit to the State Utility Transportation Commission. So but yeah, I'm hearing some of what you're saying. But yeah, hopefully that addressed some of the specifics of the specific King County code proposal.
Okay, next person with their hand up is Caitlin Rothermel.
Hello, can you hear
Yes,
me? Okay,
can.
hi. I'd like to echo what the last person says, and I just have a quick comment in a general way based on the diagram that we looked at the very beginning. What I saw in that diagram is that we've got diverse sources of electricity, but a lot of things playing a very small role in contributing to that electricity, building up a total that's about 1/3 of what we've got. I also saw that electric, while all the sources lose a lot of efficiency, electric is the worst. And I don't see anyone talking about how we're going to adjust this formula and strengthen this scenario, which makes me naturally hesitant to rush into anything. And yeah, I agree. It sounds like lower income people are going to bear the burden of it. And that's what I had to say. And please tell me if I'm interpreting the chart incorrectly.
Thank you. I saw Scott has his hand up again, and we'll go back to Scott.
I'm sorry, I'll keep it brief. I applaud Todd's efforts to invest in this type of climate mitigation technology. I've heard that it's not individual efforts, it's more efforts like Todd's in investments that actually changes the climate equation. On the other hand, I've kind of bragged to my sister about how I heat my house with wood. It's renewable, it's sustainable. And she told me, well, I've got a new heat pump and I heat my house in Western Mass, very cold climate, for free from my solar panels. And I get a check back. So she's carbon neutral. I'm not carbon neutral. I'm sustainable. Actually, I'm carbon neutral because the trees consume CO2. I burn the trees. I keep my house warm. She is actually carbon negative. And I am building a house right now And I'm going to use her method. I'm going to put solar panels on my roof and I'm going to have a heat pump. And I think it's the only way to go toward the future.
And Scott, thank you. But from now on, we've only got a few more questions left, and I don't want repeat questions, but Deepa Silverjohn.
Can I just, since he addressed me, let me give you 15 seconds. What he just said is true about solar and getting a check back. But you don't get a check back because solar is efficient. You get a check back because we heavily subsidize solar panels. So that's the question, is where government should put its subsidy money to get the most bang for the buck. And in Western Washington, subsidizing solar is one of the worst ways. So what you're saying is correct, but it's not true because of this panels, it's true because of government subsidies.
Thank you. Deepa, you have a question.
I think I was actually not next. I think Johnny was before me.
Oh, okay. Johnny, if you could ask a question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, folks. My name is Johnny Kocher. I work at RMI, an independent, nonpartisan nonprofit whose mission is to transform global energy to use clean, prosperous, and secure low-carbon future. Todd Myers presented extensively on the Climate Commitment Act tonight. This is actually a case of a classic split incentive. Builders most often aren't the ones paying the bills, and businesses that operate these buildings will be the ones paying increased operational costs as their bills go up. Projections on the current California floor price on carbon, likely a severe underestimate. The Climate Commitment Act will start at around $20 per ton and will increase annually over the lifetime of the building, about 40 to 50 years. A price on carbon incentivizes cheapest climate solutions in the short term, but our investments in the built environment span 50 years plus. So it's important as a policy to save customers money down the road that we transition off gas soon. Since this is a case of a split incentive, it's responsible for unincorporated King County to adopt building codes that will set up businesses with clean, cheap heating sources, since unincorporated King County knows that by allowing new natural gas equipment to be installed in buildings, they will be burdening businesses with high operating costs as the CCA grows higher and higher over the lifetime of the building. Also, the Washington State Energy Strategy indicates that the most cost-effective scenario to decarbonize the state is to electrify buildings, specifically by passing codes that encourage electrification for new buildings, such as the one that King County currently is looking at. RMI supports these proposals and is happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Deepa.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Deepa Sivarajan. I'm the Washington Policy Manager at Climate Solutions. I was invited to your October meeting. Thank you very much for that invitation. And I was there to answer questions about this proposal when I believe this motion was introduced. I want to note that PSC was at that meeting as well to specifically talk about how their electric side is trying to meet their CETA obligations, which CETA is the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which will require them to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity grid. So that information has already been presented to this council, and I hope that PSC will continue to update you on how they do that. So in that note, I wanted to respond to what Ward presented. The graph or the chart that he showed about emissions and sources of greenhouse gas emissions from electricity versus natural gas, that was for national statistics. Here in Washington, we have one of the cleanest electricity grids in the country. And as I mentioned, we're already required under state policy to make that grid cleaner and cleaner. Also, this code proposal that Nicole is talking about not only shifts the new buildings from gas to electric, it also shifts us off of highly energy inefficient older sources of electricity like electric resistance. For example, that's what my older building has. I have an electric furnace, but electric heat pumps are 3 to 5 times more energy efficient, which means that we're not going to see a huge jump of load on the electric grid because we're also using more energy efficient appliances. And as Nicole mentioned, the buildings that are built through this code will also be more energy efficient in their envelope. Because this code is not simply a single piece to require heat pumps. It is a large code package that has been vetted by lots of experts and is a very thorough look at how we can improve our buildings' energy efficiency and clean energy. So I just wanted to note those things and also note that the thing that hasn't been mentioned here is the health impacts of gas, which are not something that are distributed across the world like Todd was trying to say CO2 emissions are. If we burn gas here, it's our communities that are going to be facing the air pollution from that. Buildings are a higher source of air pollution in Washington than all of the power plants in Washington combined. So those health impacts are affecting our communities, our residents, usually our most vulnerable residents, usually residents in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities or low-income communities that are located in the areas near where there's already a lot of air pollution. So that is what we're talking about here. And the fact that the Climate Commitment Act has goals for the future does not mean we should stop acting on climate now. It just means that we need to be prepared to start making those changes now so that we're ready for the future, so that we're not spending more money down the future to retrofit our buildings back from the buildings that we built with gas. We can start making that change now. We can save money now that we would have to spend in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to limit the remaining questions to Melvin, Kevin Jones, Art Chippendale, Chris Hawes, and then Roxanne Thayer. Okay, Melvin.
So I'm a little confused about the process. Are we supposed to be asking questions to the three speakers, or are we actually
Any one of the three
speaking about the merits of the
Well, you
bill?
can either one.
Either one?
Yeah.
Okay, what I have to say is pretty simple.
Okay.
I understand from what's been said that passing these regulations are going to cost people some money. Now, how much does it cost if we allow global warming to continue and we have to pay for the cleanup after hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and fires? I mean, I think we're talking about a very small percentage of what it's going to cost us in the future if we don't get a handle on global warming. And so I'm willing to do anything pretty much where we're going to reduce the effects of in the long range. I think the short range we can afford to pay a little more, even if I have to pay more, I'm willing to do that. So I'm for this proposition.
Thank you, Melvin. Next would be Kevin Jones.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the speakers who talked today. I think, as we mentioned at the last meeting, Ward Carson's analysis basically says we need to get away from fracked fossil fuels and we need to move towards electrification. And the sooner our energy utility cleans their electricity, the more attractive heat pumps will be. I heard Todd talk about the fact that there's now a statewide cap and trade law, which should do the trick. That statewide cap and trade law just came into effect last year. We've seen a lot of laws, as Todd points out, that have been applied to the carbon problem. And so far, we still have a serious climate crisis, and we're not moving fast enough in the right direction. And we know that. We're seeing the smoke, the fires. Bonnie Lake burned up 2 summers ago. This is not something to worry about, quibbling about, is this more or less expensive? Now is the time to move and get the job done. Heat pumps, you can argue, well, it'll make life more expensive for those building owners, but heat pumps also, for space heating, also provide cooling. And when the heat dome comes along, which it did this last summer with its attendant fatalities, it's very important that people have the opportunity to have cooling as well as heating. And in this case, one expenditure means you get both services, which are basically life-saving services. Heat pumps far and away are going to be a better deal for people who live in our region. Caitlin mentioned that electrical systems degrade. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm sorry, I wonder what the evidence is. I kind of am suspicious about the degradation of electrical systems. So I can't factor that in as something that I would pay a lot of attention to. Sorry, that's my background. I just wanted to put that out. Also, there was a dismissal of solar panels. There's a lot of people on Vashon with solar panels. It was mentioned in the chat. A lot of people are getting a lot of power from their solar panels. Norway has solar panels. We need to recognize that all sources of renewable energy are the things that we need and want, and we know that on Vashon. And so that is why I support this proposal, and I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
So
Next would be Art Chippendale.
Can I address a couple of things just real quickly?
Point of order,
actually, no,
David. I think Todd has had time to speak, and I would like us to
no,
move
and
on.
I wasn't
Right.
recognizing Todd at this point unless
Somebody
else
has a question, then I'm happy to answer.
Okay, Art Chippendale.
Okay,
Okay,
hear me now?
yeah.
Okay, great. So, yeah, I wanted to address a couple comments that were made about natural gas and fracking. And, you know, even though King County's, we've got a pretty clean record of, for our own network of electrical distribution and that sort of thing. But fracking is what it takes to get the methane out of the ground, and it's transported via pipeline all across the country. It causes air pollution and water contamination on the sites. There are a lot of toxic chemicals involved, and it does a lot of damage in its own right. One of the things that is the fact that we're going to end up paying for cleanup sites, and that's going to come out of taxpayer money. So I think the less fracked gas that we have, the cheaper it's going to be in the long run. And I just wanted to ask one question. Okay, I'll try that. I'll try to. Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better?
Art, if you could turn off your video, it might be better because it takes too much bandwidth.
Yeah, I'm not. I can hear you.
Stop video.
Okay, I'll click the stop video button. I'm not sure where to go for that.
Right. It's on the bottom left usually.
Oh, stop video. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Oh, does that help? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of that you caught, but the point was that our natural gas, which contains primarily methane, is created by, or I should say, is pulled out of the ground by fracking, which is a very destructive process, creates air pollution, water contamination, and a lot of toxic chemicals are used in the process. That gas is distributed all over the country via pipeline, including Washington, and it doesn't matter how clean the rest of our electric grid is. The fact is, we still have leaks in those pipelines, and there's a huge tank that's been built there in Tacoma that is going to be fueling tanker trucks.
Art, I'm going to have to cut you off now. You're way past 2 minutes, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Chris Hawes, please.
Thank you for a couple minutes. I just wanted to make a point as an industry expert in the HVAC industry for 30 years. Not all heat pumps are created equal. So something to be aware of as you give up your right for energy choice between gas and electric, that being able to power a home with a heat pump and solar panels, it might work in a 1,000 square foot facility. You have a 2,000 square foot home, you may not have enough area to power the heat pump. Strip heat is what provides the backup heat, and that's where the extra cost comes from. Now, if you have a highly efficient CO2 heat pump that uses CO2 as refrigerant, you can operate down in minus 30 degrees and get plenty of heat. But those are extremely expensive systems and still somewhat experimental and not ready for the mainstream residential market. So I just wanted to point that out there for you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Roxanne Thayer, and then Suzanne Greenberg, and then we're going to call this for a vote.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to begin by saying I support the proposal. And I have a over 2,000 square foot home. Heating it with a heat pump seems to be doing fine. It was not a super expensive one. I also have mini splits. The government is not heavily subsidizing solar panels in this country, at least not up until last summer. There was the summer before that we installed the panels, and there was very little subsidy. In other countries, there's high subsidies for that. People are getting solar panels in Western Washington because it works. Every day that I look at my solar consumption or my solar gain, I see how many trees I have planted by using solar panels. Okay, I think that's it. Still not paying an electric bill. And so the 15 solar panels did send a lot of electricity back to the company, which is the electrical company, which is now refunding that to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roxanne. And Suzanne Greenberg, last question speaker or comment.
I have just a short comment or two. One is I'm on the board of the Vashon Climate Action Group and the leadership team. And the leadership team and the board is unanimous in supporting this bill. This bill will set infrastructure in place that will be there for the long haul, so we don't have stranded infrastructure that is related to fossil fuels as we transition to an electric grid, which is what is necessary to combat the climate crisis. So please vote in support of this. This is the right thing to do.
All right.
Despite what you've heard from some partisan groups tonight.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, I would like to call a vote, and we do have a poll that we can present to the membership. And if you're not an island resident, you're not a member of this body, so you can't vote. Okay. So with that in mind, I'd like to call the question, all island residents who would like to vote on this matter. Nicholas, do you have the poll ready?
David, before we do that,
okay.
I think we should read the motion.
Oh, okay. Sure. And do you have the motion to read?
I do.
Okay.
Okay. The Vashon-Maury Island Community Council, VMICC, is concerned about the climate and understands that greenhouse gas emissions from buildings is the #2 source of climate pollution in Washington state. Because of this, the VMICC endorses approval of updated building codes being considered for approval by the King County Council. These new building codes would restrict most uses of fossil fuels in new commercial and large multifamily buildings in unincorporated King County.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me to read the motion. Okay. All right. At this point, Nicholas, if you could put the poll out there, and we'll take a poll on this.
I have a quick question. Who moved and who seconded the motion?
Do you recall, Diane?
I think it may well have been Kevin Jones who moved it, and I don't know who seconded it.
Justin Hirsch seconded the motion in November.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for the question, Bunny.
So I'll leave the poll up for another 2 minutes or so.
Okay.
I think we can probably move on with the agenda.
I agree. So we'll move on to
the poll.
Where is the poll exactly?
I don't see the poll either.
Nicholas?
Oh, now I do. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
And somebody is asking how to vote when there are multiple members of a household.
You can, that's a good question. If there are multiple members of a household, there should be multiple votes. Diane?
No.
I think probably the best way to handle this is just see how the poll comes out, and if it's overwhelmingly one way or the other, then take into consideration the people who are on the phone and have multiple members.
So far, 67 folks have responded to the poll, and 63 of them voted to approve the motion. That's 94%.
Yeah, that will save us time, David.
Okay. All right. Well, with 67 votes and 64, was it? In favor of the motion carries. Okay, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is at the October meeting, a motion was moved and seconded, Kevin Jones made a motion at the November meeting for voting on at this meeting. That motion has been changed by a friendly amendment to Kevin Jones. He has considered it in light of the fact that some of his initial motion might not have been considered just something that was within the purview of what the Vashon-Maury Island could actually accomplish. And so he's modified his motion, and it now reads as follows. The Vashon-Maury Island Community Council condemns the racist graffiti incident in the Vashon Village Green of November 2021, adding our voice to the hundreds of organizations and individuals on Vashon-Maury Islands who added their names to a statement in the November 11, 2021 edition of the Beachcomber. 2, second bullet point, commits to form an equity committee who will engage in meaningful communication with the Vashon-Maury community to educate the council about equity barriers facing island residents. The equity committee will create and submit an equity policy for approval by this council to guide our own actions and policies to remove equity barriers and to advocate for bias-free norms in the wider community. And the last bullet point, commits to take appropriate action on racial justice and equity issues affecting Vashon-Maury Island residents brought to the council. Okay, I would open the floor up for comment.
And David, I think protocol is the mover has a first opportunity to speak.
Okay, well, Kevin, please.
Thank you, David. For those, Melvin Mackey, thank you for pointing out that the motion that was introduced in November has been adjusted with friendly inputs, and the motion that David read is nearly the latest version. For those who'd like to look back, the original motion is in the chat. What I'm proposing is that we go forward having friendly inputs. So that we, as the mover, I've agreed that those are all good movements, good suggestions, and that we'll go ahead and adopt those. The one change is that for the very last clause, the additional words in consultation with island racial justice groups, the council commits to take appropriate action on racial justice and equity issues affecting Vashon-Maury Island residents that are brought to the council. That adjusted clause is also now in the chat. I would like to say that the, let's see, I did have some comments that I wanted to make sure to cover here. I will say that the council has many good words in its policies and procedures about equity, but the council does not have an equity policy. This motion basically asks the council to address racial justice and equity issues that are brought to them. I think it's a very good start at an equity policy, and the motion on the floor has now been expanded to show other elements of what are very good inputs, I believe, to an equity policy. The motion's important. We know that Vashon is diversifying. We know that racist graffiti is a negative reaction to diversification. As a community, we need to clearly set the narrative about racial justice and equity on Vashon and Maury Islands. Being silent merely invites more and potentially more damaging expressions against our diversifying community. So I would like us as a council to recognize that we need to be very clear and concise, clear-eyed about our community, its increasing diversity, and that we need to make statements and set the narrative now that says this is something that we welcome, and we cannot accept inequities against folks who join our community. We should be open and inviting to them all. And thank you for the opportunity, David, to speak.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Oh, one thing before I let you go, I think there has been some question about the fact that you have been in communication with the board. And what I'd like to make clear is that the board has not proposed any language itself, but just made it clear to you that we felt that it did not directly apply to Vashon-Maury Island, and it needed to apply to Vashon-Maury Island to be appropriate. Is that a good summary?
That's a good summary. And I appreciate the feedback from the board, because we all know that the council is a little bit of a nebulous thing, right? There's the council, there's the board, there's the council members, of which we all are, and then there's the processes the council uses. And so the feedback in terms of how the council operates and what the appropriate wording is in the motion have been very helpful to get this motion, I think, aligned better with the language of the council. So I hope that we've been able to move in that direction. So appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Kevin. Deborah Anderson, you have your hand up.
I do, thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna leave my thumbnail up. I have some post-COVID stuff I'm dealing with that makes my eyes a little funny.
Okay.
I'm a longtime former resident of Vashon. I'm one of those seniors that got forced off the island by economics, but have remained very, very active. I'm currently the leader of the creation of Strawberry Fields Farms, a farm which will be a boutique working farm for adults with primarily intellectual and developmental disabilities on the island. And I currently am a member of the King County Disability Consortium, formerly served on the King County Metro Access RFP work group for a couple of years, spent 5 years on the King County Developmental Disabilities Advisory Board, have also done my stint on island as pastor at Burton Community Church, twice been president of PTSA, and served for 25 years as a caregiver on the island for special needs families. I'm also have received the advanced training in race and equity through King County, through the 0 to 5 training. So since qualifications and credentials always get looked at first, why is she speaking and what does she have to say about it? I would like to recommend that instead of a committee, Vashon Council form a task force. I'm going to say boldly, with all of my experience, I don't think Vashon has honestly assessed itself as a primarily white community, white able-bodied community. And I think that would be a good first step. The statement that you have in one of your proposals about no symbolic acts, I think at this point, assigning an equity committee or creating one assumes some sort of mastery of understanding. Let me give you some numbers, because
I have to tell you, you've got about 10 seconds left.
Oh, that 50, okay, that 2 minutes went first. Okay, I would like to make that recommendation. In order for King County, or for Vashon to reflect accurate racial equity, about 6,236 Asian people would have to move on. 1,891 Black people would have to move on.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you've gone past your time, so we'll have to move on to the next speaker. But thank you for contributing. Michael Laurie, your question? Or your comment, and we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I support the general idea of equity, and I think it's a great idea to work to achieve more equity on Vashon. I think the way I look at this is that we're all the council, and I agree with Kevin that it's a little vague as to, we have the board and we have who is the council. But I would say that if people want to are suggesting forming an equity committee, or a task force, they should step forward to take a leadership role in doing that instead of pointing and saying that somebody else should go do that. Because a lot of people are pretty busy with what they're already up to. So that's my main point here is
Okay.
that, yeah, that's it.
And Michael, I appreciate what you're saying. And in the years that I've been involved with the council, my general approach is that if someone brings an issue like this to the community council, they're going to be the temporary chair of the committee. Okay.
Great.
All right. Bill Lyle.
Yeah, my only comment is I'd like to see possibly a little more refinement to the statement to take appropriate action. I'd like to see a little more refinement there instead of, okay, what are you talking? Vigilantism here, ostracizing people.
Okay, I think if I could interpret that the way I see it, vigilantism and ostracizing would not be appropriate. I can't imagine anyone who would say that under any circumstances that's appropriate. But I understand what you're saying. It's a somewhat vague term. But
yeah, that's all I'm pointing out is I'd just like to see a little more refinement, like appropriate legal actions or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Bunny Hatcher?
Yes, I just have a quick question, and I want to give a nod to Deborah because most of I've dealt with equity issues for a while, and so many of them deal with disability and lack of accessibility, and that's a big equity issue. And I've seen in some of the documents a good non-discrimination policy, but there's a huge difference between non-discrimination, equality, and equity. Okay, let's take the example of there's a field where a baseball game is being played and you've got a 6-foot fence around it. And there's 3 people wanting to watch the game from outside because they couldn't afford tickets. One really tall person, one average person, and one short person. Well, there's non-discrimination there. They didn't build that fence to discriminate against short people. So you can say this is not discriminatory. So, but if you pursue equality, then you bring out 3 1-foot boxes and give 1 to each person. And then the really tall person and the average person can see over the fence, but the really short person still can't. So for equity, you redivide those 3 boxes. The really tall person doesn't get 1. The average person gets 1, and the really short person gets 2. And that would be an example of equity, where then everybody has equal access to something. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about equity with that kind of a definition, or are we talking about still talking about anti-discrimination?
Equity, in my knowledge, has always dealt with justice and fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and,
yeah, and the fairness would be that this way all 3 people get to see the game. That's what makes it fair. So I think we're on the same page for what is equity.
Okay. Thank you, Bunny. And I'd point out with Deborah, I'm sorry I had to cut you off, but I had a friend on Vashon who had MS, and she referred to people as temporarily abled, those who were not so-called disabled people, temporarily abled. Art, you had your hand up, and if you could also shut off your video while you talk, that would be helpful.
Unmute and
Art, if you can stop your video, because I don't have the bandwidth. Thank you.
Right, there you go. Okay. So I hope you all can hear me now.
Yeah.
I just had a couple of thoughts about, I agree with the motion in general, but one of the, I would say, if there's any pushback on this at all, I think this should be maybe reframed with the preamble at the beginning, in which we can deal with why we're doing this and basically frame it around that. In other words, if we're going to, whether it's to form a committee or a task force, it's definitely an issue that, let's say, the council wants to look into and wants to perhaps be able to do something or move people to do something about it. So I would begin with a preamble that starts with, whereas graffiti and other other voices on the island have been making it, have been making racial remarks, yada, 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 and get to, therefore, Vashon Community Council wants to deal with this issue by creating a task force to, let's say, did you hear that?
Yeah, and thank you.
I can't hear you now.
Okay, your 2 minutes are up, Art, but thank you for your comment.
No, I can't hear any of you, so.
Okay.
Point of order, David?
Yes?
Art sounded like he wanted to make an amendment to the motion. If Art, you want to make an amendment to the motion, you need to work out the words and propose it as an amendment to the motion. I'm just going to say that. And
okay.
And Art has converted it to a resolution with the format of wherefore and then therefore be it resolved.
Okay. But Art, what Diane was saying is it would be very helpful if you could write that out and then put it in the chat. And if the maker of the motion wishes to adopt it, he could. Otherwise,
Thank you for that.
What's that? Okay, thank you. Then the other people I'd like to call on are Rachel Rome, Suzanne Greenberg, and then Melvin Mackey, and then I'd like to close the discussion. Rachel?
Yes, I'd like to yield my time to Deborah, if that's possible.
Okay.
Oh,
Deborah
okay.
Anderson?
Yeah, thank you. That's a surprise.
Can everybody just mute? Please, somebody's echoing. So everyone who's not speaking, please mute.
Yeah, because there goes 10 seconds. I want to be quite candid about this because I'm deeply committed to Vashon and looking forward to the time that I can buy my little piece of property and move back on. And have been a strong advocate in the county for it. But I want you to know how serious this issue is. It isn't Vashon Island's to own. Vashon Island has to come into compliance with what's going on in King County as far as way beyond equity. We're now dealing with a mandate for inclusion as well as diversity. And I just really want to encourage the council to make a bold move and develop a task force and work with some people that can do some interviews, that kind of thing. This is how serious King County is. And I say this to the meeting. I tried to adopt a cat through VIP and was denied because I was disabled and they were concerned the cat was going to rush my feet. I ended up adopting a disabled cat. Being the activist that I am, I'm currently a member of the cohort number 2 through the ARC of King County, which is community advocate training. The Office of Civil Rights of King County wanted me to sue VIP. And I told them, in what planet did they think that my suing the most beloved organization on Vashon was going to make any inroads in building bridges to understand diversity and inclusion. So I just want to bring a little off-island wisdom from my heart as a Vashon Islander. that this is a huge issue, the most important issue. And to say what I said in the chats, eyes are on Vashon right now because it is the most completely out of compliance with ADA of any other community in King County. And we are 93% white. That became—
Deborah, I'm sorry, but that's another 2 minutes. And so I'm gonna, have to move on to the next speaker, but thank you for your contribution.
Take it seriously, David.
Oh, I do. It's just that we do need to move on. Okay. And yeah, and we have an affordable housing committee. As difficult as that is a task for us, we're trying to do it. And as I said, it's a tough situation. And I think Terry saying that what you're saying is that you want us to be more proactive and then reactive. And I think that's quite accurate. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Terry, for pointing that out. Suzanne?
I just want to say I agree with a lot of things people are saying. I also want to kind of point back towards the very first line that one of the things that feels very important to me is that we make a statement condemning what happened. The community, we don't have a government on Vashon. The community council is our sort of closest thing to a government, something that can make a statement. And I think silence is a statement, and it's really important. I think all of the action pieces are incredibly important, and it's also crucial that the very first thing where we say the community council condemns what happened, that's a very crucial part of what needs to happen.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. And Melvin, if you could.
Yeah, I'm speaking in favor of this motion. And one thing that I think will happen if we establish an equity committee is that hopefully enough people will be interested to join that they will do some self-education at the beginning, as Deborah is suggesting. I thank you, Deborah. And they may decide to actually increase the coverage of what they do to cover diversity, equity, and inclusion, kind of the things that Deborah was talking about with the fence. And so I'm for the motion, and I would like to know if we could find out how many people are actually interested in being on this committee before we actually vote. I mean, a show of hands or whatever, or somebody that knows the answer to that question.
I think that's a good thing to ask. And at this point, would people show their hands if they would be interested in participating in such a committee? Well, looks like we have some favorable reaction by some people who are very capable. Nice to see you again, Yvonne Cooperberg. Nancy Murphy. Okay, so, all right. Looks like we have good start for a committee here. Thank you, Melvin, for bringing that up.
And David, I believe the protocol is the mover has the option to speak last on the motion.
Okay, and I know that you were invited to. Okay, Kevin, sure.
Okay, so I appreciate all the feedback. I do think that it's important that we move forward with the motion. There's a lot of folks who said we should include this, we should add that. I have no disagreement with that. But what we need to do, in my opinion, is move forward with the motion so that we can listen to those voices and make sure that that content gets considered. I've talked to some folks who are experts in doing this work and have got some very good feedback about how to proceed. So I've worked a little bit ahead of just introducing the motion. The very first step that the current advisor said was, first, let's talk about why we want to do this. Why is this important to Vashon-Maury Islands? How does this fit with the council? Those are really important questions to ask and answer. And that, I think, will help address some of the issues that Deborah brought up. You know, how expansive is this, and what communities are we really looking to consider in moving forward? As you saw, I'm happy to play a role on the committee or the task force or whatever we call it. I appreciate the feedback, all the help, and I look forward to people supporting the motion. And thank you, David, again, for the time from the council board.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. And the motion has been friendly amendment, split the elements in two: condemnation of racism, hate speech, and then establishment of an equity committee task force. Did you want to consider that, Kevin?
I think that it would be difficult for people to know exactly what that looked like in terms of the wording of the motion. So I appreciate, Roxanne, the feedback, but unless there's something specifically in the motion that is a negative element, that I recommend that we proceed for a vote. And of course, if you'd like to raise an amendment, you could. But I think in the interest of time, I'd like to move forward if we could.
Okay. Well, I'd like to call the question then, and if Nicholas could present the poll, we can vote on this motion.
Hang on, this is Armin. It seems like Roxanne has proposed an amendment and I would second it.
Okay. Well, I guess then let's take a brief vote. What I'd want is a show of hands. All those in favor.
No, what's the amendment?
Point of order, David?
Yes.
Point of order. I think that Armin suggested that Roxanne's proposing a formal amendment. Her comment
maybe
is
we
for a
should ask
friendly amendment.
Roxanne.
I think Roxanne should have an opportunity to see if Armin is correct.
Roxanne, I'd like to ask you, is that a formal amendment, and are you asking for a second, or are you, how would you say, do you accept going forward with the motion as it is?
I proposed it as a friendly amendment, but after hearing Kevin speak as to where we are in the motion at this time, I'm withdrawing it and prefer to proceed.
Thank you, Roxanne, and thank you, Kevin.
Okay, then I think Roxanne is onto something, so I'll make that motion to amend and see if there's a second.
I will second.
So now I guess we have discussion.
Excuse me.
And someone post that amendment in that.
The amendment, I think, would read as follows: split the elements in two: condemnation of racism and hate speech, and then establishment of an equity committee and task force.
And Roxanne, could that be done just with numbering?
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever you find to be most expedient. I'm looking at it and the statement stands on its own. It would just be adding the other part, it looks like.
Okay. So then the first paragraph would be number 1, and the last 3 paragraphs you could put as number 2, and that would be the amendment. Roxanne, okay.
Yes.
Okay, and Kevin, would you accept that as an amendment? Just number the first paragraph as like a Roman numeral 1, and then the last 3 paragraphs as a Roman numeral 2?
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understand, Roxanne, the changes, but if it's just leaving the words the same and rearranging them on the page, then I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Well, then, having accepted that friendly amendment, then let's proceed to a vote on the on the proposal, okay?
Wait a minute, I don't understand here. All we're
wait.
doing is adding a number?
Yeah, Roman numeral 1 would cover the first paragraph. It's a clear statement that we condemn the racist graffiti incident. Roman numeral 2 would deal with the fact that we are trying to form an equity committee, and it speaks to the equity. So it's basically, I think what Roxanne was saying is that it's separating these two elements so that they're clearly two separate elements in the motion. And Kevin appeared to accept that as an amendment. And so at this point, we can just take a vote on it as amended. Okay, Nick, if you have the poll. Thank you.
So this is Suzanne. I don't think that this is the statement that I was understanding we were about to vote on. This is not the statement condemning what happened.
No, we have limited space in the question.
Right, it's
So
right.
The motion, I think somebody should post the motion in the chat, just for clarity, maybe with the Roman numerals added as proposed.
Sure. Kevin, if you could repost your motion in the chat. Thank you, Suzanne, because that's a summation of it, as opposed, we could not put the entire motion in the poll under Zoom protocol. So thank you. We'll put it into the chat.
This is my understanding of the motion. Roxanne, you might want to take a look and see if that was your intent.
Yes, I think that clears it up and makes each statement and each movement much stronger and clearer.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And hopefully everybody can see that in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, Kevin.
Mm-hmm. And point of order, David, Jessica has her hand up. I don't know if that's.
Oh, okay,
from previous
Jessica,
vote
did
or
you
comment.
have?
Actually, I was just trying to vote on two computers because Jay is trying to vote on the iPad, and I think it shows as a raised hand. I can't get the poll on my iPad, so sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I'll leave the poll up for another couple of minutes. So far, it is 98% in favor. 51 out of 52 votes.
Are we voting in the chat? I don't see a poll.
Okay, Nicholas, if you could explain where the poll would appear.
Depends on the client that you're using to view Zoom. So if you're on the Zoom app, it should be a floating window. If you're on an iPad, I'm not honestly sure. If you're joining by a mobile phone, I also don't know. It may be hidden under a menu somewhere, I'm afraid.
No, I'm on a laptop.
Are you viewing it in a web browser or are you using the Zoom desktop?
I'm using Zoom.
I don't see it either, and I'm on my desk computer in here.
Yeah, Nick, the poll disappeared from my screen. I thought you might have taken it down because we had an amendment.
I did. I took it down and then I relaunched it. So let me see where it gets hidden to, if it gets hidden.
Okay.
And then please review how to vote more than one person in the household with one account.
Perhaps if we have enough votes already, we can tell what the outcome is without having to go through the process of assuring that everybody is able to vote.
Yes, Robert, that's what Diane had mentioned earlier. I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, we're at 98% in favor currently.
Oh, good.
Okay, never mind.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And let's move on to the next topic, and that was
Excuse me, this is Virginia. I'd just like to clarify, 98% is great, but if it's 98% of 3 voters, that's not good. So could we
okay,
also have the
Nicholas,
number?
if you could tell us how many you're counting.
It is 56 total respondents and 54 of them voted to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up. I apologize for buzzing by it. Okay. All right. The next item on the agenda is old business. At the November meeting, a motion was moved by Armin Yusufian and seconded by Michaela Olivieri. Begin each general monthly meeting of the VMICC with the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. Speaking to the motion with mover's privilege will be Armin Yusufian.
I don't know if you can hear me because I got a message saying I had been muted.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, well, there's not much to say. Lots of groups on the island, the fire district, I'm not sure about the school district, start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I thought that would be a nice ceremonious, I don't know if that's a word, kind of a thing to do, and it would bring us all together and remind us that we are all citizens of the same country and should be pulling together. And there you go.
Okay, thank you, Armin. I'll take speakers in the order they're coming. Jessica Lisowski, is your hand raised, or is that from the vote? Oh, looks like it's down now. Robert Piston.
Oh, yes, thank you for letting me express my thoughts. You know, the first lines of the pledge are for those who have allegiance to our country, and I do, and I happily pledge allegiance. But there may be those Vashon residents who are not citizens of this country and owe allegiance somewhere else. And they are Vashon residents, and I want them to feel welcome. I don't want them to feel unwelcome because we recite words at the beginning of every meeting. And in the same vein, there may be some people at meetings who believe in several gods, not just one or maybe none at all. And I don't want them to feel unwelcome because of their religious beliefs. And the third thing, I guess one of the things that really bothers me about the Pledge of Allegiance is that it says that it claims that the United States has achieved liberty and justice for all. And you know, it really hasn't. I think the United States aspires to do so, but it's shameful that it hasn't. And I don't think that we should assert at the start of every meeting that liberty and justice are present for all residents of the United States. We see daily that many in the US are not free and that justice is unequally distributed. So I don't think we should perpetuate this untruth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next would be Hunter Davis.
Hi, and thank you, everyone, for all your comments. I think the Pledge of Allegiance is really, as the previous speaker just spoke, for people who are citizens of the United States, and you do not have to be a citizen of the United States to be a member of this council. So we would be excluding some people, and we really don't want to exclude anybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Hunter. Art Chippendale, and I appreciate that you have your video off.
Thank you. So, yeah, I oppose this motion. The VMICC, first of all, is an independent nonprofit organization. We're a self-governing body of individuals not associated with any government entity. The Pledge of Allegiance it's a patriotic oath, but despite its ubiquity, it is not a legal requirement. Even in public school students, they do not have to recite it. And the reason is that it was found to be back in 1943, the Supreme Court ruled that it violated the First Amendment, and which is freedom of speech. And symbolic speech is the right of anyone not to participate. And in 1954, the words "under God" was added, which also violates the freedom of religion clause of the First Amendment. So I oppose this motion, and I suggest that we all vote against it. Thank you.
Okay, and Melvin.
Yeah, I'm speaking in opposition to the motion. We just now are starting evidently an equity committee. And the equity committee is there to help us to be fair to everyone who is a member of, not only a member, but lives on Vashon-Maury Island. And so I think this is not in that spirit. So I'm going to vote no.
Okay. Do we have any other speakers? I don't see any at this point. So I'd like to call the question.
I had a
Oh,
comment.
okay, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah, I just spent about the last 4 months doing a show on the Voice of Vashon. And I did it on veterans, primarily on Vietnam veterans. And as I don't know if you know or not, but there are 12 members of those classes in 66 to 70 young men on Vashon that were killed in the Vietnam War. There are over 600 veterans buried in our graveyard that's right now disgraced by garbage trucks. But those people gave their lives. I also know tons of people, so I really don't care how people think, but because you're going to find somebody that's going to disagree with everything. But I think that it's a disgrace to not vote for this piece. And I am also think that we just, we need to look what got us here. Do we have liberty for everybody? Heck, no, we don't. It's a working process, like all these things, So that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
I think as the mover, I get the last word if there's anybody else who's going to speak.
I think Kevin Jones had something to say.
Okay, that's fine.
And Terry Sullivan.
That's fine.
Okay, and you do get the last. Okay.
Yeah, I want to say thanks, Steve, for recognizing those who served, and clearly, Veterans Day and other recognition is certainly very appropriate for that. Not to say that that's sufficient, because clearly people gave their lives, and many who didn't give their lives gave so much of their capabilities. Who've returned with injury, whether physical or otherwise. I do think that I would want to echo Melvin's policies that, in the last, when the motion was raised, there was discussion that said, you don't have to recite the motion if you don't want to. The concern that I have is that if that's the price of admission to the council, where we want to be inviting and open to all, but this one thing, you don't have to say the words if you don't feel comfortable, just puts people in a position of having to decide if they're going to maybe violate some of their own personal beliefs in order to feel welcome here. And while I totally understand what you're saying, I have a hard time asking anybody to violate their own religious beliefs or their own citizenship to be a member of this group. So that's why I will be opposing the motion as well.
Okay, thank you. Terry?
I think that there's a good reason for having something that we can attest to, as a group, but I don't think that the Pledge of Allegiance is it. I think something more like the Gettysburg Address comes a little closer to, aspiring to the proposition of what this country was founded for, and then honoring all of the people that have struggled and fought and died through all of this time in this process of perfecting this union that we're trying to create. And so I guess I'm calling for the creation of something, at some point that, we could all speak to, that speaks to all of humanity, and also sets the tone for the night, being respectful and of your community members and so on and so forth. Anyway, I don't know what that would be, but I do like the idea of having something that we could all express that speaks to all of us.
Thank you. And Michelle, you were the seconder of this motion, if you could speak to it. Mika? Sorry. You may be muted. Yeah, you are.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
There you go.
so I did second it, and then as I began to read, what Gavin, had proposed, I really do think that, and I'll say why, I did second it, because I come from a generation of immigrants. My grandmother became a citizen, and in order to do that, my grandfather from Norway, my grandmother from Mexico, they all said the Pledge of Allegiance, and they did it with a lot of pride and respect for the country. And I think even people who aren't citizens, when they come to this country, they do take certain pride. However, with that being said, I do think that the community council should be neutral. And what was just stated, I was about to say that maybe come up with something that is neutral, that shows the respect, so that we start the meetings off respectfully, but that does engage everybody and that respects everybody, that comes united as one. That was what I was going to say.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jessica Lisowski, was your hand raised, or?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I'm gonna let my husband speak though.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm on screen or I'm just on.
You're off screen.
Great. I don't have to look good then.
Correct.
I'm a veteran. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'll disagree with the doctor. There's nowhere in the Pledge of Allegiance that says a damn word about a veteran. It talks about the country, not a veteran. And I don't want him using me as a veteran as an excuse to have a Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not against the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't think this is an appropriate venue for it. I think in the first, second, third, and fourth, and fifth grade is the venue for it. And other than that, I think it's a waste of our time to even be talking about this, because as a veteran, I highly resent someone standing up and pledging allegiance to me and thinking they're giving me a pat on the back. If you want to give me a pat on the back, buy me a beer.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that's all the people who had their hands raised. So we'll go back to the maker of the motion, Armin.
Right. Well, I'll just add that, as has previously been stated, there is no requirement to recite the pledge or any particular word. And the person whose name I've forgotten now, who talked about the history from the 1940s, 50s, and so on, is absolutely correct that there's no requirement to do that. For whatever it's worth, I am the son and grandson of Armenian immigrants. My ancestors in 1915 in Armenia were massacred by the Turks, and America was one of the countries that took my grandparents in, and I feel fairly strongly about this country. Many of the comments in the Pledge of Allegiance are aspirational. I just thought it would be a nice thing to do. And I found the comments interesting, and some of the points were even pretty good. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Armin. And I'd like to ask Nick if we could put this up. Oh, Art's already spoken. Okay, if we can put this up for a vote at this time.
We have 52 respondents. The poll stands at 52 out of 53 reject this motion.
Okay. Well, thank you. The next item on the agenda is committee updates. Ways and Means Committee, John Afalter. If you could give us an update with regard to the Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm speaking to you all, and I'm beginning to think that we, the membership, are the Ways and Means Committee. And with that in mind, the Ways and Means Committee is going to start its first project over the next few months. And that project is to create some kind of a fundraiser that would give the council a budget. You may not know this, but a lot of the board members have been footing the bill for some of the operational expenses that are occurred, and it's not pocket change. So I'm proposing that the Ways and Means Committee come up with some form of a fundraiser where we can get enough money to at least pay the board members back and maybe have a little money left over in the pot for something to do. So the one thing that I'm asking of you, the board, of you, the membership, is to send me some ideas, fundraising ideas that we could think about and work on, and see if we can come up with an idea where we could raise that kind of money. The other thing is that if you would be interested in working on a project, also send me your email address and I will inform you what the outcome of this request is and what the next step is. So just to recap, we're looking to create some form of a fundraiser to get an account going and put our treasurer to work. Because I don't think our treasurer has much to do.
Okay.
And so that's it. So send me your ideas. And if you're interested in serving in some way, at the next meeting, I'll let you know what we come up with. And that's it.
Okay, well, thank you. The next item is if either Emily Scott or Justin Hirsch can tell us about ferry disruptions and the implications.
Hi, David.
Hi, Justin.
Justin Hirsch here. I'll be really brief. I think probably everyone's heard my disclaimer by now, but I'm on the Ferry Advisory Committee. We're not WSF employees. We're just people who live here, who have been given a bit of a megaphone to shout back at WSF and ask questions. So we're happy to be a conduit for information, and we're also really happy to take community input, back to WSF. Of course, there's other ways to do that. We might have a little bit more of a direct channel. So 3 points today: service disruption, the Fauntleroy dock, and the need for an additional member of the Ferry Advisory Committee. So on the service disruption, WSF continues to work on what they're calling their service restoration plan. And that basically means hiring more people and getting them in place so that they have the crew necessary to run the extra boats. Some service has been restored in the system. The San Juans has gotten 1 boat back. So they're at 4 out of their usual 5 now. They do have a plan for restoring service, mostly focusing on other routes besides the Triangle route. My personal opinion on that is that when I look at the rate at which they are able to hire people despite their best efforts and the need other places in the system, that we are probably going to see this schedule, which is awfully similar to our winter schedule, probably through the remainder of the winter and hope for some improvement in spring. I think that's, certainly frustrating for me to hear as a daily commuter, but I think realistically that's what we're looking at. And I'll be happy to answer questions about that at the end. As far as the Fauntleroy dock, I'm going to put a couple things in the chat here. So there's, of course, the 3 committees. There's the Technical Advisory Committee, the Executive Advisory Committee, and the Community Advisory Committee. My fellow FAC committee member, Emily Scott, is on the Community Advisory Committee and spoke very well at the recent meeting about the need to increase the capacity of the ferry dock. to meet WSF's policy of matching the size of the ferry dock with the size of the vessel. And also for the function of expediting service. At Fauntleroy, they have an incredibly complicated process. And so I'm going to post a screenshot in the chat that shows what that process is. Hopefully that posts.
You can share your screen
Four
too.
meetings at this point.
Justin, you could share your screen if you wanted to.
Let's give that a shot.
Okay.
I think we're just going to share this.
Okay.
Okay. Can
Great.
folks see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of acronyms here, but CAG is just Community Advisory Group. And they have had 4 meetings. I forget what PEL stands for because it's late and I've been up since 6, but it involves transportation planning. So essentially they're going to create a set of criteria by which to judge ideas and contributions to the process. And then of course the community advisory group consists of individuals from Fauntleroy, Southworth, and Vashon. And it's, pretty heavy on the West Seattle side. So they're obviously going to get a lot of suggestions. There's 2 levels of screening there and there. And if you sort of follow the roadmap there, that's what they're looking at. So I don't have a whole lot more to report on that. Besides that, I don't entirely understand this myself, and I actually was not in that meeting. I watched a recording of it after the fact, and that's what that YouTube link is for anybody who wants to devote an hour of their life to know exactly what's going on with Fauntleroy Dock. But the short story is that there will be public meetings in the future, and the main contact person for that with ferries is Hadley Rodero, and I probably can find her email address there and put it up if people want to reach out to her directly. But
great.
I'll stop sharing for now. Hopefully that's informative. There's supposed to be a series of public meetings in the coming year. They have not set dates for those meetings yet, but we'll be passing on those dates to the council as soon as we have them. So the last point there is, of course, we're supposed to be a 3-person committee. We only have 2 people right now, myself and Emily Scott, who's also the director of our food bank. Emily works really hard on the committee. She's the chair. She and I work really hard to kind of trade off responsibilities on the committee. She's super dedicated. We kind of agreed that this was my night. So we would love a 3rd person who wants to really dig into all those acronyms and get a handle on what's going on and get involved and devote a lot of personal time for not a lot of personal gain. So, the community council is supposed to appoint this individual. There's no requirement for King County or the executive to be involved. And I got to say, I think it's probably just as simple as, opening nominations at one meeting, letting the nominations be open for a month, and then voting on it the next meeting. So with that, that's the report.
Well, thank you, Justin. Rachel Rome had a comment.
I'd actually like to volunteer, Justin. I'm currently a professional transportation planner. I don't have prior experience with ferry planning, but I'm happy to help.
Wow. Are you actually submitting your name for the community council to consider? This is great.
I got to say, if you don't need ferry specific experience. I mean, obviously there's, some things that are specific to maritime, but an awful lot of the stuff, the dock, understanding the system. I mean, if you understand transportation planning, I'm sure you'll pick it right up. You'd probably do better than I will.
And Rachel, could you communicate with me? I'll give you my email address. It's dsvogel, VOGEL .atty@gmail.com, because we'd very much like to have a third person on this committee, and you are the first applicant.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's both that's frightening and exciting. I look forward to
great.
helping you out, Justin.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
To be fair, some individuals have also expressed interest, and it just seems like, for the sake of transparency, we should have an open process.
Oh, sure, sure.
So, I mean, that's certainly not up to me as an individual, just because I happen to be on the FAC. I think it's up to the council as a whole.
And Justin, if you have names of other people, please forward them to us, because the board does have to consider these. And Rachel, it's not a done deal because you spoke first, but we will certainly consider you very carefully, and I appreciate your stepping forward, Rachel. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, just let me know if I can help.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And Justin, thank you for all the time and effort you put into this. It's really, it's a big effort, very little reward, but you're helping the community a lot. So thank you.
Appreciate that, David. And can we just, for the sake of myself and Emily, can we just get some clarity from the council on exactly what the process is going to be on appointing this person, and can we move forward on that?
Yeah, we'd like to move forward and like to do it as soon as we can. What I would like to do is get all the names of people who are interested. We can consider it at our next board meeting, and then we can propose someone for the next general meeting.
Well, so I don't know if this I don't know if this is acceptable as a motion, but why don't I just move that, nominations are open now and the council will vote and make a decision next month.
Do we have a second? Okay.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. And we'll vote on that motion at the next meeting. Hopefully we'll have a nomination for us. Okay.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
I will forward you the names that I have, and I imagine that other individuals who are interested could nominate themselves directly by email to you. Does that make sense?
Okay. Excellent.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Okay. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Okay. Our next meeting is January 17th, Martin Luther King's birthday. We had decided that Martin Luther King would not oppose a community gathering to share concerns and try to resolve community problems. Go ahead.
Point of order, David.
Yes.
We never did talk about the motion that we moved to new business.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. The motion that was moved to new business. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Okay.
So it's a motion that we talked about as a board in the board meeting as a policy for the VMICC to avoid symbolic resolutions. And the idea was kind of took shape because we had several different ideas for motions that were purely, I guess you could say, symbolic in nature, meaning making a statement but not having any kind of like actionable like follow up on them. One was talking about having a land acknowledgement. One, the first iteration of Kevin's equity motion, which at the time was a statement of principles without a actionable follow-up. And then the third one was to say the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of meetings. So the idea behind this motion, and I will drop the text in the chat here of what the proposed motion is. And this language would go, sorry, it's not like paragraphed out here, but there are two different kind of prongs. One is to avoid adopting symbolic resolutions. Two, to strive to be neutral ground in our wider societal cultural conflict, allowing islanders of different ideologies and political persuasions to join together to work on local issues. And so those would be put underneath the, I think it's the second clause of our policy statement, which talks about like being nonpartisan. the idea is that if the VMICC was a place to kind of like for people to step up and kind of hang statements there, we'd spend a lot of time haggling and discussing broader culture war issues without having actionable follow-up local items, which would suck time and energy out of the room. So that is the idea behind this. And I'm happy to talk more about like why this is something I proposed and why the board was behind this. But this is sort of like to talk about like this is what we're looking at bringing up for the next January meeting.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gavin. And it's great that Kevin recognized our concern and adjusted his motion to make it more of something actionable as opposed to a broad statement. I see Melvin's got his hand up.
Yeah, one of the first things we did as a community council was very symbolic. It was to create a logo. And that does nothing. It's just a symbol. So I'm kind of a little bit confused here.
Yeah, I mean, I just that like the logo is part of the branding and communications work for the committee, but it's not taking a specific statement on an issue. The wording is difficult to get this right. I have a PDF, which maybe I can share, which has some sort of like, I guess you could call it legislative intent behind it. But that wouldn't fall under this as envisioned by the board.
Okay.
And also I have another question is who decides whether something is inappropriate?
Well, the answer to that would be the board. I mean, the language is to avoid adopting symbolic resolutions. So we'd have to make a judgment call, but this is basically a statement of principle. I mean, who decides what is an appropriate measure for furthering equity, right? Like every time we have this, the board will have to take a look at, or excuse me, the council as a whole will have to take a look at it and just kind of go by like what the kind of overall guidance that we've established is.
Well, I hope that will be added to the motion. How it's determined whether something's appropriate or not.
Okay. Debbie Jackson, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I have a comment and a question. The comment is that I think we saw tonight that the evolution of Kevin's motion did very much involve action and participation by a lot of people who are interested in the equity committee. So I think that just shows that something that starts out as symbolic can evolve into something that's really a wonderful addition to the council. The second question is, does the community council board have a template for motions that people can read ahead of time before the meeting so that they know what the guidelines are for something that's actionable and would be more acceptable? And then I guess the third thing comment is that it sounds like the board has a process of they're throwing out things that are not relevant to the community council. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And Noah, your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks. Quick point of order. What part of the process are we in right now? Are we debating the motion or what are we doing?
We're just discussing it a little bit. The debate's going to come next month. We're just bringing it up and discussing it briefly.
Okay. All right. Well, so maybe I should hold my comments to the discussion about the motion specifically when we get to it next week then?
Sure. And it may even be somewhat morphed by then. You never know.
I'll wait till then. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And Kevin.
Thanks, Gavin, for summarizing the sort of evolution of the motion. And I appreciate the fact that as you know, I sat in the December 6th meeting and heard the process and how it evolved. I think it's wise for the board to give some more consideration to the motion. I would say that I understand that if it does get added to the policies and procedures that we currently have for the board, that they will have the opportunity to make a decision about whether a motion does or does not go forward. I think, as Debbie pointed out, that can basically allow us to miss things that could develop into an actionable statement. I also think that it's hard to measure symbology and culture wars. I don't have a yardstick for that. I don't think any of us do. And the yardstick that I have probably looks a lot different than everybody else's yardstick. So it could just actually put us into endless debate about what is symbolic and what is a culture war, as opposed to just focusing on the merits of the motion, right? And I think that we saw today with good order in the meeting that we can pretty quickly come to that, and the good and wise folks of Vashon-Maury Island can just sort of cut to the chase and address that. I also understand that that if the board does decide a motion is not appropriate, that a 2/3 vote of the council can overturn that. So there's no lost hope, right? It's something we really feel is important, can be pulled out of the dustbin. But I just don't think, in my mind, while things that are easy and clear to measure, like does this apply to Vashon or not, I think that's very appropriate. Things that are really subjective, it just doesn't seem the best role for the board to put their thumb on that scale, if you get my drift. And I think that's what the council's for, is to invite a variety of opinion to help us see the way forward on some of these what might be kind of tricky issues. So that's the kind of the process thing that I raised at the December meeting. And I think that the board is, like I said, really well served to think about the complications that might be introduced with this motion. So appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. And Virginia Lohr.
Hi, thank you. Just a couple of thoughts off the top of my head on this for you to think about as you move forward. One is, if you've got 3 examples of how many motions that have been a problem, are we putting too much effort into defining these kinds of things to solve a problem that really isn't that big? And I agree with Kevin that, there may be some concerns where particular people feel that they're, get really resentful at the council because their motion was denied. And, we don't want to do that. We want to have people feel welcome. And I've also heard someone express the question of, but wait a minute, isn't everything that this community council does symbolic? You're not official. Who comes and who votes, all of these things. Isn't everything that you do symbolic? So just some initial thoughts off the top of my head.
And Noah.
Yeah, sorry, I would like to make a comment then just briefly, which is that I understand the basic issue here, which is that we should be putting forth motions that are actionable. And I agree with that in concept. What I want to say is that this is not a policy. This is a guideline. This is a suggestion for how you might proceed. And so if you think about the whole business of policies and procedures, the policy will be what you have to do, and the procedure is how you have to go about doing it. And then you have guidelines that inform, or that's commentary about how we intend to do things. And so I just wanted to suggest that maybe you reframe this as guidelines for how the meeting is conducted, but it's not a policy. It's not clear or direct. It's not a suggestion that we do or do not do a specific thing. So just want to mention that.
Okay. And Suzanne.
And I just want to say, as this relates to the racial justice piece, that the idea that condemning it was symbolic, but then when we came up with committees, it was okay. And I want to say, voice very loud and clear that that is not acceptable to me. As a body reacting to a horrible event that happened on Vashon, I want to know that the action we can take is to condemn something. And the idea of kind of fitting it into, oh, that's symbolic. There's nothing symbolic about speaking up against a wrong.
Suzanne, if I could just comment, there was nothing thought to be wrong about condemning the action on Vashon, but the motion went further and said basically in general, and as it applies in general to this country, to the universe, etc. When we're doing something that applies to Vashon, that's within our wheelhouse. When we're speaking about the world about, it's beyond our abilities, it's beyond our scope. And that was what the concern was. But condemning that specific incident, I don't think anyone had a problem with that.
Okay, so then I would like to go back to, we already have this in our bylaws or our whatever, that things have to be related to Vashon. And I
And
think
that's been pointed out, yeah. And
right.
that's a
So I
good
don't
point.
think, so I don't see a need for this new kind of nebulous, is it symbolic or not symbolic? Let's just stick to it. Needs to be relevant to our island in some way for it to be an item that's brought here, and not because it's very abstract, this idea of symbolic statements. And so this group is about Vashon, and it's already in the intention that the things that get brought up here are related to the island and to this community.
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne. Are there other comments waiting? I don't see any. So at this point, then I'll just say that our next meeting will be Martin Luther King's birthday on January 17th. Same time, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock or thereabouts. And thank you all for participating. It was very lively and good meeting. We had a lot of great contributions. So thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording and end the meeting. Night all.